Greetings. I didn't think I would have to make another video about how insane people are becoming about using anecdotes to justify a narrative of higher inflation, and not because they are benefiting from selling the inflation narrative, like someone like Peter Schiff does, but because they're desperately looking for a way to be unhappy and stressed out, simply because it would take too much work to look at actual data about the facts. You can see my video in the upper right hand corner here about why not to use anecdotes as a measurement of inflation, because out of 500 plus different consumer items, there will always be one that is rising a lot, but there will be many that are also falling. Only the index matters, as I speak about on this channel. Now, the viewers of this channel are much more intelligent than the average person, of course, but one thing that you've seen in the news is this hysteria about the price of eggs. Eggs being a staple food. And this is the amount of media mention about the price of eggs in the United States. Nobody really cared about it much over this 5-year period until recently, where you got a certain amount of hysteria that the media created about the price of eggs. Now, of course, this is Google Trends that only looks at search terms, and this might lead you to think that something truly astonishing had occurred. But now let's look at the real data. This is the average price of eggs, grade A, large, cost per dozen in U.S. city average from the Federal Reserve, going back to 1980, so 43 years. Look at how it was flat for 20 years, then it started to rise. And this is a logarithmic scale that I chose, of course. It started to rise. Then there was a big fall. There was an egg bonanza from 2016 to 2021. If you like omelets and eggs, then eggs are very inexpensive, and now it's risen this much. Now, number one, is this really a dramatic rise within the historical context? If you're going to cherry pick this rise as being steep, what about the 20 plus years during which it was flat? The compound annual growth rate over this entire series of 43 years is virtually nothing, number one. And number two, I am certain it's going to fall very quickly, just like it did before. Remember when they were talking about framing lumber being super expensive, and then framing lumber fell, so that became the anecdote that is no longer used. They first used framing lumber, which you can see in this video up here about my analysis of that. Then they used butter. Now they're using eggs. Next month it will be something else. Is this now the level that the game has sunk to, that you find an anecdote of one thing that's rising, ignore everything else that is not rising, ignore the concept of an index or a composite basket of goods, and start screaming about inflation? And here's the thing about eggs. You should eat pasture-raised eggs, of course, not the factory-produced eggs. And pasture-raised eggs do cost 2.5 to 3 times as much as those factory-produced eggs. That is a different tangent about health and nutrition. But even so, how many eggs are you really eating? If a dozen eggs costs $4.25 now, are you really eating more than 4 eggs a day? Even 4 eggs a day is a lot. That's 28 eggs per week. Unless you are a bodybuilder or a sumo wrestler who is also on a tight budget, I cannot see eggs being a significant percentage of your income. And if eggs became cheaper, would you really eat much more of them? Let's say eggs fell back to the 2020 or 21 price of $1.50 per dozen. Are you going to eat omelets much more often? Now here's the problem. The inflation narrative is not specific to conservatives and libertarians in the US, but they have made it their narrative and therefore come across as even less intellectual than before. At one time it seemed that conservatives formed their opinions based on verifiable data, and that it was the leftists that were more emotional about using anecdotes to push a narrative. But conservatives have now devolved to the same anti-intellectual culture. But even worse, conservatives are always on the losing side too. And that's why the media can start to scare people about the price of eggs, and the conservatives, who on one hand seem semi-aware that the media is rigged against them, they happily go along with whatever the media tells them to get hysterical about. I mean, there are actually people losing sleep about the price of eggs because of this rise here, which is not unusual considering the entirety of this series. They're losing sleep over this. This is funny. This is actually funny. Now, if you go to a conservative website like Instapundit, you see how anti-intellectual a formerly intelligent website has become. This is Instapundit, and I just have done a search for eggs. One word, eggs. Okay, one person complaining about eggs were $1 a dozen. That's fine. How Colorado's cage-free egg law could impact prices. Why are eggs so freaking expensive by Ed Driscoll. This is a multi-blogger website, remember, so it's not just one person who's obsessed with eggs. This is ridiculous. Eggs now hottest item to be smuggled from the US to Mexico. I highly doubt that's being done in volume. Eggs are $8, but White House wants you to know inflation is gone. So number one, it's not $8. We just saw it's $4.25. Number two, why is this a political partisanship thing? So let's click on this article. This is even more ridiculous. Now, this is written by Steven Cruiser. Now, if someone who's secretly a Democrat were hired by Democrats to try and make Republicans get distracted by meaningless scare memes, while the important things are things Republicans are distracted away from, such as winning elections or legislation, you could hardly choose any set of actions different than what Steven Cruiser does. So if you read everything he's written, you'll see this pattern. Eggs are $8, again, that's bogus, but he wants you to make that into a partisan thing. And you can read all this, it's crazy how, oh, eggs are gone and now we're not going to ever have omelets anymore and so forth. It's beneath the dignity of the intelligent viewers of this channel to even rebut this line by line. But the point is, how can they be hysterical about something so anecdotal that cannot possibly be a significant portion of your expenditures? If you really want to look at inflation, that is one of the main themes of this channel, the thing to look at is the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, which over 10 years has been in deflation, but even over 3 years, you can see commodities had a brief peak and have been falling for quite some time. So rather than being happy that oil prices are falling and natural gas prices are plunging, these Republican conservatives are screaming about the price of eggs because eggs are such a huge portion of someone's budget. Unless you're a college student who's also a bodybuilder or a sumo wrestler who's actually trying to eat 48 eggs a day, I don't see how this can possibly be any sort of mathematical justification to get hysterical. Eggs are simply not a large part of your expenditure. And how can you connect the price of eggs to the Federal Reserve? Remember, they are so brainwashed into thinking that Federal Reserve money printing causes inflation, even though the US Federal Reserve is only 1/4 of the entire world's money printing, that they're connecting this to Federal Reserve money printing, which actually began in 2009. So if you want to look at the price of eggs from the start of quantitative easing in the US to present, you would have to take this price and then annualize it, and it's still not a high percentage growth rate. But then what happens when the price of eggs falls again, as we saw with framing lumber? So the moral of the story is, don't get whipped up by these anecdotes, because every month there will be a different anecdote. Once the price of eggs falls, they will find something even more ridiculous, because conservatism and libertarianism in the US has become intellectually bankrupt, and whining about non-existent inflation to the extent of cherry-picking anecdotes and ignoring an intelligent method of looking at inflation through an index that is a composite of all goods is what they have devolved down to. They have sunk down to this level of trying to scare everyone about the price of eggs. I didn't think adults could be this hysterical about an anecdote, because there's always going to be another anecdote, and next month, like I said, there will be something else. Anyway, I hope you found this video to be informative, and if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much for watching.